Two little twin girls were accused of stealing a cupcake on a freezing winter morning. But when a stranger stopped to listen, he uncovered something far deeper than a misunderstanding: a sick mother, two brave children, and a moment of kindness that would change all their lives forever. Snow fell over Burlington, Vermont, like powdered sugar drifting from an invisible hand, soft, steady, and strangely gentle for a world that could be so sharp. The lake wind pushed the flakes sideways in thin silver lines, and the city moved slower, as if everyone agreed to lower their voices and keep their heads down. Across from a narrow bakery on King Street, Bennett Crow sat alone in a cafe booth by the window. He was 39, impeccably dressed, the kind of man people photographed without asking because his life looked expensive from a distance. His black wool coat was folded neatly beside him. His watch face was clean, his collar straight, his hands still. A coffee sat in front of him, untouched, the steam long gone, the surface flat and dark, like it had given up trying to be warm. His phone buzzed softly on the table. Board call, 4:30 p.m. Bennett flipped the screen face down without reading the rest. Bennett Crow built cities on paper before they ever rose from the ground. He founded Crow Harbor Developments and turned empty lots into glass towers, turned worn buildings into luxury addresses, turned impossible into approved, with a quiet confidence that made people follow him. He was known for clarity, precision, control. But control did not fill a house at night. It did not answer a teenager's silence. Not since the divorce. Not since his daughter Talia stopped replying. 16 years old now. Old enough to protect herself from disappointment. Old enough to remember every time he said later and meant it. Bennett stared out at the snow without really seeing it. Outside, the bakery windows glowed warm and amber against the white street. Parents hurried by with backpacks and coffee cups, shoulders hunched, breath puffing into the cold. A couple laughed as they nearly slipped on the sidewalk, catching each other by the elbows. Bennett watched it all the way a man watches life through thick glass, aware, untouched. He lifted his cup and took a sip. The coffee was bitter, flat, pointless. He set it down with a soft clink. Then the sound cut through the morning. A voice sharp and accusing, too loud for a day this quiet. "Hey, stop right there." Bennett's head lifted. The world snapped into focus. Across the street in front of Lock and Crumb Bakery, a small crowd began to gather, pulled together by the same instinct that made people slow down at accidents. And at the center of it were two very small figures in matching red knit hats. Bennett stood before he realized he had decided to move. The cafe door swung open behind him, letting warm air spill into the cold. Snow brushed his shoulders as he stepped onto the sidewalk and crossed the street with long, steady strides, the way he walked into boardrooms. But this was not a boardroom. This was a sidewalk, and the stakes were smaller and somehow heavier. In front of the bakery doors, two girls stood frozen in place. Twin girls. No more than 8 years old. Nearly identical, same dark eyes, same wind-reddened cheeks, same thin winter coats zipped all the way to their chins. The kind of coats that looked like they had lived through more winters than they were meant to. One girl clutched a small paper bag against her chest, like it was fragile and precious. The other held a wrinkled $5 bill in a mittened hand, fingers squeezed tight, as if the money might disappear if she loosened her grip. The bakery owner, Cassia Locke, stood with her arms crossed. Her voice was strained rather than cruel, tired rather than hateful. "I saw them," she said to the small crowd. "They tried to walk out." "We didn't," one of the girls said quickly, words tumbling out too fast. "We were paying," the other added, her voice shaking. "We just hadn't put it down yet." They spoke over each other, fear tangling their sentences. Not defiant, not rude, just confused. Snow gathered silently on their hats as they stood there, too small for the moment that had found them. Something inside Bennett shifted, sharp and sudden. It was not heroism. It was recognition. A memory flashed so hard it made his chest tighten. Talia at 6, standing at the edge of his desk with a crayon drawing held up like a gift asking him to look. He had been on a call. He had smiled without looking. He had said, "Just a minute." Minutes became hours. Hours became years. Bennett stepped forward, his voice calm but clear. "Let's slow down." The crowd turned. Cassia looked at him startled, as if she recognized the kind of man who didn't get interrupted. Bennett didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply lowered himself and knelt in front of the girls, bringing his eyes level with theirs, so the world didn't feel so tall. "My name is Bennett," he said gently. "Tell me what happened." The twins looked at each other first. A glance passed between them, quick and practiced, like they had been solving problems together their whole lives. Then the girl with the money spoke again, forcing the words out carefully, as if language itself had betrayed her before. "We didn't steal," she said. "We were going to pay." She was holding the bag, and I was holding the money. We just didn't put it down yet. The girl with the bag nodded so fast her hat bobbed. "It's for our mom," she whispered. Bennett didn't rush them. He let silence sit steady and kind. Up close, he noticed details most people missed. The way they stood shoulder to shoulder like their bodies were a wall. The way the bag girl kept it tucked under her arm like it was more valuable than warmth. The way the money girl's mitten trembled, but her chin stayed lifted, determined to be believed. Bennett looked up at Cassia, respectful but firm. "How much is in the bag?" Cassia's jaw tightened. "A single cupcake," she said. $3.75 with tax." Bennett reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and placed a bill on the bakery ledge beside the door. "I'll cover it," he said. "And I'd like us to end this here." Cassia's eyes flashed. "That's not the point." Bennett met her gaze without hostility. "Sometimes it is." The crowd began to thin as quickly as it formed interest, fading now that there was no public shaming left to enjoy. Bennett turned back to the girls. "Can I ask your names?" The bag girl swallowed hard. "Ivy," she whispered. The money girl answered with a little more force, as if she refused to be the one who disappeared. "June." Bennett nodded slowly, memorizing them. "Thank you," he said softly, "for telling me the truth." Both girls looked up at him, startled not by the sentence itself, but by the feeling behind it. Belief. No demand for proof. No lecture. Just belief. Bennett stood. He kept his hands visible, relaxed, careful not to crowd them. "You didn't do anything wrong?" he said. June swallowed hard. Ivy's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Across the street, the cafe window reflected the three of them, two small figures and one tall man, standing between winter and something warmer. And Bennett Crow understood with a quiet certainty that this moment was not an interruption. It was an invitation. The cold bit harder once the crowd thinned, as if the weather had been waiting to reclaim the street. The bakery bell jingled softly when Cassia Locke stepped back inside her posture, stiff pride holding her upright, even as something like shame flickered across her face. Snow continued to drift down in patient silence. Ivy and June stayed on the sidewalk as if their boots had frozen to the concrete. Bennett could see it in their bodies the moment after fear, when a child is still bracing for the part where adults get louder again. He kept his voice steady and low, the way you speak when you do not want to startle a wounded animal or a guarded heart. "You are not in trouble," he said. June stared at the wrinkled bill in her mitten like it was a fragile thing she could not afford to lose. Ivy hugged the cupcake bag tighter, the paper crinkling softly under her arms. Bennett did not ask where they lived, like he had any right to that information. He did not ask for their mother's name. He did not ask to see inside the bag. He simply offered a choice. "If you want," he said carefully, "you can tell me where you were going. If you do not want to, that is okay too." The twins looked at each other again, that silent twin language that moved faster than words. Ivy spoke first, like truth had been building behind her teeth, and she could not hold it in. "Our mom is sick," she blurted. The words rushed out as if she feared the world might steal them back. "She gets tired fast. She coughs a lot. She did not ask us to come. We just wanted something small." June nodded quickly, jaw tight. "She likes chocolate," she added, trying to sound matter-of-fact like she was giving a report instead of admitting need. It has been a while since she had anything sweet. Ivy lifted the bag slightly, almost as if she wanted Bennett to understand that this was not a treat. It was a tiny attempt at comfort. Bennett felt something tighten in his chest. That was not pity. It was guilt sharpened into a point. He saw his own daughter's face in his mind, the way Talia used to hold up a drawing and wait for him to be present. He remembered smiling without looking. Remembered saying later. Remembered how later never came back. Bennett forced himself to stay in the moment. He looked from Ivy to June, making his voice gentle but honest. "How old are you both?" "8." They said together perfectly in sync, then blinked as if surprised by their own sameness. Bennett nodded. "8 is a big age," he said softly. "It is also too young to have to carry heavy days." June's chin lifted stubbornly, a child trying to be a wall. "We can handle it." Bennett did not argue. He simply met her eyes. "I believe you," he said. "That does not mean you should have to." He glanced down the sidewalk in the direction they had come from. "Do you live close?" Ivy pointed down the road. "Green door," she said, then added quickly, "3rd floor." "The stairs are loud." Bennett exhaled slowly, thinking the way he always thought, carefully, in steps, in boundaries. "Here is what I will do," he said. "I will not walk beside you if you do not want that. I will walk behind you like you are supposed to do with strangers. I will keep distance. I will not ask to come inside. I will just make sure you get to your door safely." June studied him like she was searching for a trap. Why Bennett could have given an easy answer. He could have performed kindness like a speech. Instead, he chose truth that tasted like regret. "Because I heard you," he said. "And because I do not want to be the kind of person who hears a child's voice and keeps walking." The twins did not smile, but something in their shoulders loosened like a knot, finally letting go. Ivy whispered, "Okay." They turned and started toward home, stepping carefully across slick patches. Ivy held the cupcake bag high and steady between them, like a fragile promise. Bennett followed several paces behind, far enough to respect their rule, close enough to keep the world from feeling too big. Every few steps, June glanced back. Not openly, not rude, just quick checks like counting heartbeats. Ivy did not look back as often, but her hand kept reaching for June's sleeve again and again, a silent habit of making sure her sister was still there. Bennett noticed everything. He noticed the way their coats hung a little too thin against the wind. He noticed the way June's shoulders squared every time a car passed, like she was bracing for danger that might not even come. He noticed Ivy's careful steps, the way she avoided cracks and ice like she had learned to move through life without falling because falling cost too much. It felt strange using his sharp attention he used to reserve for profit margins and construction schedules on something as small as a mitten and a paper bag. It also felt like the most important thing he had done in a long time. They reached the apartment building with the green door and the tired brass buzzer. The steps were cracked, patched with old salt and time. A hallway light flickered overhead, struggling against the gray. Ivy stopped at the bottom step and turned. June turned, too perfectly matched. Their cheeks were red from cold. Their eyes were what stopped Bennett. Those were not the eyes of children who believed adults would save them. Those were the eyes of children who measured a room before they entered it. June lifted her chin and tried to sound official. "You can stop there." Bennett nodded immediately. "I will." Ivy's voice came out small. "Thank you for helping." Bennett kept his hands visible and relaxed. "You were brave," he said. "Both of you." June shifted her weight and blurted, "We are not supposed to take rides from strangers or go anywhere." That is a good rule, Bennett said. Keep that rule. He did not argue. He did not try to bargain. If someone ever tells you to break it, you find a safe adult. A teacher, a nurse, a police officer, someone in uniform. Ivy nodded, absorbing every word like it mattered, because it did. Halfway up the stairs, their boots echoed just like Ivy warned, loud, hollow, too sharp for such a small building. Ivy looked back once and lifted a quick, shy wave like she did not want anyone to see hope in her hand. Bennett returned the wave, small and still keeping his distance. Then the door above closed, and the building swallowed the twins into shadow. Bennett should have walked away. That was the sensible thing. But he stood there longer than the snow wanted him to, staring up at the third-floor window that glowed faintly with yellow light, like a quiet question that would not let him go. The twins climbed into the back seat, slowly, cautiously, like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Ivy held the pharmacy list carefully in both hands, and June sat close beside her, shoulders slightly angled toward the door, as if she wanted an easy exit if something felt wrong. Bennett closed the driver's door without looking back at them right away. He understood something simple: trust between strangers, especially children and adults, was built in silence first. The heater hummed quietly as the SUV pulled away from the curb. Snow slid across the windshield in thin streaks, the wipers keeping a steady rhythm. For a moment, no one spoke. Ivy leaned slightly forward and read the list again under her breath, lips moving carefully across each word, as if reading made the medicine more real. June watched the passing buildings, eyes sharp and alert, memorizing turns and landmarks like she was mapping a route in case she ever had to come back alone. Bennett noticed everything without turning around. That was the skill he had spent decades perfecting, observing, without making people feel watched. The pharmacy appeared ahead, its bright green cross glowing softly through the snowfall. Bennett pulled into a parking space near the entrance and turned off the engine. He did not move to get out. He did exactly what he promised. June opened the door first, her mitten gripping the handle. Before stepping out, she turned back and looked at Bennett with a seriousness far older than 8 years. "You wait here," she said. "I will," Bennett replied simply. Ivy followed her sister, clutching the folded paper with the prescription name written carefully in pencil. The girls walked across the icy pavement together, their boots crunching softly with each step. Bennett watched them through the windshield. He saw Ivy stop once to check the note again. He saw June reach for the door handle of the pharmacy, pause for half a second, then straighten her shoulders and pull the door open, like someone preparing for a negotiation. Minutes passed slowly inside the warm car. Snow gathered on the hood. Bennett's phone vibrated twice on the console, emails, calls, reminders of a life that usually demanded his attention every minute of the day. He ignored it. For the first time in years, the urgency of those messages felt small compared to the quiet responsibility waiting on the other side of the glass. When the pharmacy door opened again, the twins stepped back into the cold. Ivy held a small brown paper medicine bag against her chest. June carried a long receipt that fluttered in the wind. They climbed into the car again, bringing a swirl of cold air with them. Ivy spoke first, her voice low. "It cost more," June added, trying to sound casual. "They changed something. Insurance." Bennett turned slightly in his seat, but kept a respectful distance. "Did you get everything the doctor said she needs?" Ivy nodded quickly. "Yes." June stared at the receipt. "We used our lunch money for the week." Her voice stayed steady, but the sentence hung heavy in the car. Bennett started the engine slowly. "You shouldn't have to choose between lunch and medicine," he said quietly. June shrugged the motion, small but stubborn. "We can eat at school," she replied. Ivy whispered almost apologetically. "Sometimes we buy chocolate too. Just a little. It helps Mom smile." Bennett swallowed and pulled the car back onto the road. The tires hissed softly over packed snow. When they reached the corner near the Green Door apartment building, Ivy spoke again. You can stop here. Bennett parked. Before the twins opened the door, he reached into the center console and pulled out a plain business card. There was no gold lettering, no title under his name. Just a number. "This is my phone number," he said. "If your mom gets worse, if you feel scared, if you need help, you can call me. Or give it to a teacher or neighbor and ask them to call." June examined the card carefully, as if testing whether it was real. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. Bennett did not look away. Because someone should. The twins stepped out of the car, snow drifting between them and the quiet street. They ran toward the green door, their boots slipping slightly on the icy steps. Neither girl looked back. Bennett stayed where he was until the door closed behind them and the hallway light flickered on above the entrance. Only then did he drive away. His house greeted him with the same silence it always did. Lights came on automatically as he walked inside, warm and soft against the polished floors. The rooms were large and beautifully arranged, but every sound echoed slightly too long. In the kitchen, Elowen Pike looked up from wiping the counter. She had worked in the house long enough to read small changes in Bennett's posture. "You missed your call," she said gently. "I know," Bennett replied. She studied him for a moment. "Something happened today." Bennett opened the refrigerator, stared inside without seeing anything, and closed it again. He leaned against the counter and exhaled slowly. "I met 2 kids," he said. "Twin girls, 8 years old." Elowen nodded quietly. "And you helped them." Bennett ran a hand through his hair. "I tried." He paused before adding something he rarely admitted. "I can't stop thinking about them." Elowen's voice softened. "Do you think they're safe?" Bennett hesitated, remembering the thin coats, the wrinkled bill, the way June had memorized the road. "Not the way children should be," he said. That night the house became quiet again. Too quiet. Bennett stood in his office, staring out at the snow-covered yard, the trees bending slightly under the weight of winter. His phone rested in his hand for a long time before he finally dialed his assistant. "I need you to look something up for me," he said. "It has to be legal and discreet." A short pause came from the other end. What name? Bennett looked out into the falling snow and remembered 2 small red hats disappearing through a green door. "Ivy Rain," he said. And June Rain. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale winter light. Snow still covered the streets of Burlington, but the storm had softened, leaving the world quiet and still. Bennett Crow stood outside the apartment building with the green door, a paper grocery bag balanced carefully in his hand. Inside were simple things, fresh bread soup that only needed warming oranges and a small carton of milk. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make a struggling parent feel like charity had arrived to embarrass them. Bennett knocked once. The hallway remained silent. He waited, giving the apartment time to wake him. Then he knocked again, slightly louder. A small shuffling sound came from inside. The door opened just a few inches, and 2 familiar eyes appeared in the narrow gap. Ivy recognized him instantly. Her red knit hat had been replaced with a gray one today, but the expression was the same mixture of caution and curiosity. "You came back," she said quietly. Bennett nodded, careful to stay a step away from the doorway. "I said I would help if you needed it," he replied. "I brought some things. I can leave them here." June appeared behind her sister, arms crossed like a tiny guard standing watch. Her eyes scanned Bennett carefully, not hostile, just careful. "Mom is resting," Ivy said softly. "She gets tired." Bennett lifted the grocery bag slightly. "Then I will be quick." For a moment the twins looked at each other, holding that silent twin conversation again. Finally June stepped aside and opened the door wider. The apartment was small but clean, the kind of place where every object had a purpose. A space heater hummed near the couch, pushing warm air through the room. A few blankets were folded neatly on a chair. The faint smell of medicine lingered in the air. On the couch sat their mother, Maris Rain, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Her posture was straight, even though fatigue showed in the shadows under her eyes. She looked up as Bennett stepped inside, and instinctively the twins moved closer to her sides. Maris studied Bennett carefully, not unfriendly but alert. "You're the man from yesterday," she said. "Bennett Crow." Bennett nodded once. "Yes." Ivy spoke quickly. "He helped us at the bakery." June added bluntly, "He believed us." Maris looked at the grocery bag on the counter, and then back at Bennett. Pride flickered across her face like a warning light. "You didn't have to bring anything." Bennett set the bag down gently. "I know," he said, "but sometimes help is easier to accept when it's just groceries." Maris hesitated, then gave a tired smile that lasted only a second. "That's true." Bennett did not sit. He stayed standing near the door, giving her the space to decide how much of his presence she wanted. "Your daughters told me you've been sick," he said calmly. Maris exhaled slowly. "Bronchial infection that refuses to leave," she said. "Nothing dramatic, just expensive." June and Ivy watched the conversation like they were monitoring a negotiation. Bennett spoke carefully. "There's a clinic nearby that works with patients who need flexible billing. I could arrange an appointment today if you want." Maris shook her head automatically. "We'll manage." "You already are managing," Bennett said quietly. "But managing alone is exhausting." Silence filled the room for several seconds. Finally, Maris looked down at her hands and spoke in a softer voice. "I am tired," she admitted. Ivy reached over and squeezed her sleeve gently. Bennett nodded, respecting the weight of that admission. "If you agree," he said, "I can drive you to the clinic. You stay in control of every decision." Maris looked at her daughters again. The girls did not speak, but the hope in their eyes was impossible to ignore. "All right," she said finally. "One appointment." The clinic was quiet and modest, tucked between a pharmacy and a bookstore. Inside, the warm air smelled faintly of disinfectant and tea. A nurse greeted them with calm professionalism, speaking directly to Maris while explaining the forms. Bennett sat in the waiting area beside the twins. Ivy colored carefully with a blue crayon, while June watched the hallway like a security camera. "Doctors make Mom nervous," Ivy whispered. June nodded. "She thinks they cost too much." Bennett kept his voice gentle. "Some things are worth the cost." After nearly an hour, Dr. Hanasato entered the waiting room with a reassuring smile. "Maris will recover," she explained after the examination. "But she needs rest and regular medication." Ivy's shoulders relaxed slightly. June asked the question no adult had yet asked. "How long?" Dr. Sato answered honestly. "A few weeks if she takes care of herself." But there was one complication. Maris would need overnight observation at the clinic to stabilize her breathing. The nurse explained it gently, but the words still landed heavily. The twins looked at each other again. They understood the problem instantly. They could not stay in the clinic overnight alone. Bennett stepped forward carefully, making sure Maris heard every word clearly. "If it helps," he said, "the girls can stay at my house tonight. My house manager will be there with them the entire time." Maris studied his face for a long moment. "Just one night," she said. Bennett nodded. "Just one night." The drive to Bennett's house was quiet. Snow drifted across the road like pale dust. Ivy and June sat together in the back seat, their coats folded neatly in their laps. When the tall gates opened and the large house appeared beyond the trees, Ivy leaned forward slightly. "It's big," she whispered. Bennett gave a small shrug. "It's mostly empty." Inside the house, Ella and Pike greeted them warmly and crouched to their level. "Welcome," she said. "I've made a room ready." She showed them a comfortable guest room with soft blankets and a small lamp glowing beside the bed. "You can sleep here together," Elowyn said gently. Ivy nodded quickly. June inspected the room carefully before giving her approval. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Bennett stood in the hallway outside their door. Ivy and June were whispering softly inside their voices, small but calm. For the first time in years, Bennett realized something important. The house no longer sounded empty. Morning arrived slowly over Burlington, the winter light spilling through the tall kitchen windows of Bennett Crow's house. Snow still rested on the trees outside, soft and untouched, and the quiet inside the house felt different now. It no longer echoed. It breathed. Ivy and June were already awake, sitting side by side at the kitchen counter, while Elowen Pike prepared toast. Ivy swung her legs gently under the stool, studying the bowl of cereal in front of her, like it was a science experiment. June watched the toaster carefully, as if she didn't fully trust the machine yet. Bennett entered the kitchen wearing a simple sweater instead of the tailored suits he usually wore to meetings. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," the twins answered together. Elowen slid 2 plates across the counter. "Breakfast first," she said warmly, "then school." June looked up immediately. "School," Bennett nodded. "Your mom said it's important to keep your routine." "I agree with her," Ivy smiled faintly. "Mom always says normal days help people get strong." Bennett felt something shift inside him hearing that sentence. Maris Rain might be exhausted, but she had raised her daughters with strength. The morning moved calmly, coats, zipped backpacks, checked shoes, tied twice to be safe. But just as Bennett reached for his car keys, his phone vibrated on the counter. A new email notification flashed across the screen. He read it once, then again. His expression stayed calm, but something behind his eyes hardened. It was an official notice. Cassia Locke, the bakery owner, had filed a formal complaint regarding the incident. Bennett slipped the phone into his coat pocket without saying anything. The twins were watching him. Children noticed changes adults tried to hide. "Is something wrong?" June asked quietly. Bennett knelt beside her chair so their eyes were level. "No," he said calmly. "Just paperwork." Adults sometimes need extra time to admit when they're mistaken. June studied his face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." Ivy reached for her backpack. "We should go." The courthouse in Burlington stood like an old brick monument to quiet decisions. Tall windows reflected the gray winter sky, and wide stone steps led to the entrance where people came and went in steady rhythm. Bennett walked beside Ivy and June as they climbed those steps. Ivy's hand curled lightly around the sleeve of his coat. June kept her hands tucked firmly in her pockets, shoulders straight. Inside, the building smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The atmosphere was calm, almost quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. Their attorney, Sloane Mercer, met them in the hallway with a reassuring nod. "Everything will be simple," she said. "You won't have to speak." Ivy looked relieved immediately. June tried to look like she already knew that. The hearing room was small. Cassia Locke sat across the room, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge entered, the room settled into silence. Sloane stood and presented the security footage from the bakery. The screen showed Ivy and June standing at the counter with the cupcake still inside the store. June clearly holding the $5 bill. Ivy waiting beside her. No attempt to leave, no theft. Just 2 children misunderstood. The judge watched quietly, then leaned back in his chair. "There is no basis for this complaint," he said calmly. "Case dismissed." The words landed softly, but the relief they carried was enormous. Ivy let out a small breath she had been holding since the day at the bakery. June's shoulders lowered slightly. Bennett squeezed their hands gently as they left the courtroom. Outside on the courthouse steps, snowflakes drifted slowly down again. "Is it finished?" Ivy asked. "Yes," Bennett replied. "It's finished." June looked up at him thoughtfully. "You believed us before the video." Bennett nodded. "Because you told the truth." 2 days later, Maris Rain returned to Bennett's house after being discharged from the clinic. Her steps were slower than before, but her breathing was stronger. Ivy spotted her from the window and ran to the door immediately. "Mom," she cried, wrapping her arms around Maris carefully. June followed a moment later, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. Maris held both girls close, her eyes closing briefly in relief. "You both look taller already," she joked weakly. Bennett stood nearby, giving them space. After a few minutes, Maris turned toward him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Bennett shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Maris smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but gratitude isn't the same as debt." Later that evening, Maris and Bennett spoke alone in the kitchen while the twins colored at the dining table. "I need time to recover properly," Maris admitted. "The doctor was clear about that." Bennett nodded. "Then we plan for that time." He explained the arrangement carefully, temporary guardianship, while she regained strength. The girls would stay at the house during school weeks. Maris could visit whenever she wanted. Everything would be documented legally, so no one lost control over their lives. Maris listened closely. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "This helps them," she said, "and it helps me breathe again." In the living room, Ivy and June waited anxiously as their mother joined them again. Maris knelt in front of them and took their hands. "You'll stay here for a little while," she explained gently, "until I get stronger." Ivy's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded bravely. June looked from her mother to Bennett and back again. "We can do that," she said firmly. "We take care of each other." Maris smiled with quiet pride. That night, the house settled into a new rhythm. The twins fell asleep quickly in their room, their quiet whispers drifting through the hallway. Bennett stood outside their door for a moment, listening to the soft sound of two sisters talking in the dark. For the first time in years, his house did not feel empty. Life inside Bennett Crow's house began to settle into a rhythm that none of them had planned, but all of them slowly learned to trust. The mornings were the easiest place to see it. The kitchen lights came on just before sunrise, casting a soft glow across the wide wooden floor. Elowen Pike moved quietly between the counter and the stove, humming under her breath as she prepared breakfast. Ivy liked to sit at the counter early, a pencil in her hand and a small notebook open in front of her. She filled the pages with drawings of stars, trees, and houses that always seemed to have the same number of windows. June usually arrived a few minutes later, hair still slightly messy from sleep, her eyes already alert and watchful, as if she were scanning the room for problems that needed solving. Bennett began appearing in the kitchen earlier than he used to. Before the twins arrived, mornings for him had been rushed, and mechanical coffee, phone calls, emails before sunrise. Now he found himself pausing in the doorway just to watch them talk about school projects, or the way Ivy's drawings kept growing more detailed every day. One morning, Ivy held up a page. "This one is the lake," she explained, "and those are stars over it." June leaned over her shoulder. "Stars don't show that bright when the sun is up." "They do in drawings," Ivy replied calmly. Bennett smiled quietly at the exchange. He had built skyscrapers and negotiated deals worth millions of dollars, but somehow the quiet argument between two sisters over imaginary stars felt more important than any contract he had signed. School days followed a pattern too. Bennett drove them himself most mornings. Ivy liked to watch the snow along the sidewalks, pointing out small details. A red scarf on a fence, a dog leaving tiny paw prints in the snow. June kept track of the turns Bennett made as they drove through the city, memorizing the route like a map. When the car stopped outside the school entrance, Ivy usually paused before opening the door. "You'll come back?" she asked one morning. Bennett nodded. "I always do." June watched his face carefully. She did not ask the question herself, but she listened closely to the answer. Inside the house, the evenings became the part of the day Bennett began to anticipate the most. Homework spread across the dining table. Ivy asked questions constantly about spelling words, about history, about why snow sometimes sparkled under streetlights. June pretended she understood everything already, But Bennett noticed how she quietly shifted her chair closer when math problems became difficult. One evening, Ivy finished her homework early and began drawing again. She slid the paper across the table toward Bennett. It was a picture of the house. 3 small figures stood near the front door, and a taller one stood beside them. "That's Mom," Ivy said, pointing to the first. "That's June, and that's you." June crossed her arms, but smiled slightly. She always makes people look nicer than they are. Bennett studied the drawing for a moment longer than necessary. Something inside his chest warmed in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Bennett walked into his office and opened a drawer he had not touched in years. Inside lay a photograph, one he used to avoid looking at. The photo showed a younger version of him standing beside his ex-wife, with a small girl sitting on his shoulders. Talia, 6 years old, laughing. Bennett placed the photograph on the desk instead of putting it away again. In the guest room down the hall, now slowly becoming Ivy and June's room, the girls whispered quietly in the dark. "Do you think Mom is scared?" Ivy asked softly. June considered the question carefully. "She's tired," she replied. "That's different." Ivy nodded and traced shapes on the blanket with her finger. "I like it here," she said. June stared at the ceiling. "Quiet can be good," she answered. "Or it can mean people left." A gentle knock sounded on the door. Bennett stood in the hallway, keeping a respectful distance. "I just wanted to say good night," he said softly. "And remind you, your mom can call anytime." June studied him closely. "You're not going to disappear," she said. Bennett shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm here." The days passed, and the quiet stability of the house began to change something inside Bennett as well. For years, he had organized his life around efficiency. Meetings, deadlines, decisions measured by numbers. Now he found himself measuring time differently. Time became the space between school pickup and dinner, between bedtime stories and quiet conversations in the hallway, between Ivy's laughter and June's careful questions. One evening, June woke suddenly from a nightmare. The hallway light cast a pale glow as she stepped out of the room, her small figure stiff with the effort of staying brave. Bennett was walking toward the kitchen when he noticed her standing there. "Bad dream?" he asked gently. June nodded once. Behind her, Ivy's door creaked open. She had woken too, sensing something wrong the way twins often do. Bennett sat down on the hallway floor, leaning his back against the wall so he wouldn't crowd them. "Do you want Elowen?" he asked. June shook her head. "Just don't go," she whispered. Bennett felt the words settle heavily in his chest. For years he had been the one who left first, leaving meetings early, leaving dinners half-finished, leaving conversations for later. Now he simply nodded. "I'll stay right here," he said. Minutes passed quietly. June's breathing slowly returned to normal. Ivy leaned her shoulder gently against her sister. "People leave," June said after a while. Bennett thought about answering quickly, promising something impossible. Instead, he chose honesty. "Sometimes they do," he said. "But not tonight. Tonight, I'm here." June nodded slowly. The next morning, June walked into the kitchen and paused when she saw Bennett already pouring cereal. Her shoulders lowered slightly before she sat down. It was a small change, but Bennett noticed it. Later that week, Ivy taped a small paper star above the hallway light. "What's that for?" Bennett asked. "It means this is a safe place," Ivy explained seriously. June added a small circle under the star. "That means we remember," she said. Bennett looked at the paper star for a long moment. He had spent years building buildings where people lived. Only now was he learning how a home was actually made. Around the same time, Maris's recovery continued steadily. The doctor reported her strength improving every day. Some afternoons, she visited the house, walking a little farther each time without needing to rest. The twins waited by the window whenever she came, their excitement contained, but impossible to hide. One afternoon, they all sat together in the living room while sunlight filtered through the curtains. Maris watched her daughters explain school projects and drawings with growing pride. "You're both growing," she said softly. June nodded. "So are you." Later, Maris and Bennett spoke quietly in the kitchen. "I'm getting stronger," she said. "Soon I'll be able to take them home again." Bennett nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'll support it." Maris studied him carefully. "They feel safe here," she said. "They feel safe because you raised them that way," Bennett replied. That evening, the twins sensed the shift in the air. Children always did. "Are we leaving?" Ivy asked quietly. Bennett knelt beside her chair. "Not yet," he said, "and not without everyone talking about it together." June crossed her arms thoughtfully. "Things don't have to end just because they change," she said. Bennett smiled. "That's true." Before bed that night, Ivy placed another small paper star beside the first one in the hallway. "This one is for Mom," she explained. June drew a small circle under it. "This one is for choices." Bennett stood in the hallway after the lights went out, looking at the stars taped to the wall. He finally understood something simple. Safety was not a promise you made once. It was something you chose again every single day. Spring arrived slowly in Burlington, not with a sudden warmth, but with small signs that winter was finally loosening its grip. Snow along the sidewalks softened into thin rivers of melting water. The gray sky began to show pale blue in quiet stretches. And inside Bennett Crow's house, the rhythm of life continued to grow steadier, calmer, more certain. By now, Ivy and June had learned the small patterns of the home, the way children learn the rules of a new playground. Ivy still woke early most mornings, sitting at the kitchen counter with her notebook, while sunlight slowly crept across the floor. June preferred to appear a little later, already alert and observant, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke. Ello and Pike kept the kitchen warm and welcoming, as if she understood instinctively that children felt safer when routines stayed predictable. Bennett often stood near the window with his coffee, watching the quiet conversation between the sisters as they prepared for school. The house no longer felt like a place waiting for people to leave. It felt lived in. One afternoon, Maris Rain arrived for tea, walking through the front door with stronger steps than she had shown in weeks. The twins noticed immediately. Mom Ivy ran forward and wrapped her arms carefully around her waist. June followed with a softer smile, leaning her head against Maris's shoulder. "You're standing straighter," June observed, always the one who noticed details first. Maris laughed softly. "The doctor says I'm improving." They spent the afternoon together in the living room. Ivy explained a story she had been writing for school, her voice bright with excitement. June described a science project involving magnets and small metal objects she had carefully collected. Maris listened with quiet pride in her eyes. "You both sound stronger," she said. June shrugged slightly. "We had practice." Later, while the twins worked at the dining table, Maris stepped into the kitchen with Bennett. The soft light from the window framed the conversation in calm silence. "I'm getting close to being fully independent again," she said. Bennett nodded slowly. He had expected this moment, yet it still carried weight. "You'll be able to bring them home," he replied. Maris studied him for a moment. "They feel safe here," she said honestly. "They feel safe because you raised them well," Bennett answered gently. "I've only been helping for a little while." Maris smiled faintly at that. When the conversation ended and they returned to the living room, the twins sensed immediately that something had shifted. Children always recognized emotional currents before adults explained them. Ivy looked from her mother to Bennett. "Are we moving back soon?" Bennett knelt beside the table so he was level with them. "Things are going to change slowly," he said. but that doesn't mean they end. June considered that statement carefully. Change doesn't have to mean goodbye, she said. Maris reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. Exactly, she replied. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the room, warm and quiet, as if the house itself was listening. The decision came a few days later on a calm afternoon, when the air outside finally carried the first real hint of spring. Snow had nearly disappeared from the sidewalks, leaving behind damp pavement and small patches of grass beginning to breathe again. Inside Bennett Crow's dining room, the conversation was quiet and careful. Maris Raines sat at the table with Bennett and the twins. Papers were neatly arranged in front of them, not as demands, but as choices. "I'm strong enough to take you home soon," Maris said gently, looking at Ivy and June. Ivy immediately reached for her mother's hand. June stayed still for a moment, thinking. Her eyes moved from her mother to Bennett and back again. "We like being together," June finally said. "That's the plan," Maris replied with a soft smile. They talked through everything slowly. Weekends at Maris's apartment as she rebuilt her strength. School nights still spent at Bennett's house for a while so routines would stay steady. Regular visits, shared dinners, open doors. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Everyone agreed that what mattered most was stability. That evening, the twins packed small overnight bags for their first night back at their mother's apartment. Ivy carefully folded her favorite sweater. June packed a book and the small notebook she used to write observations about everything she noticed in the world. Before leaving the room, Ivy paused at the doorway. "Can we still come back here?" she asked quietly. Bennett knelt beside her. "Yes," he said. "This will always be a place you can come back to." June studied him carefully. "Even when we're older?" she asked. "Especially then," Bennett replied. The next morning, Bennett woke earlier than usual. The house felt different with the twins away, quieter than it had been in weeks. But just after sunrise, his phone buzzed. A message from Maris. Attached was a photo of Ivy and June eating breakfast at their mother's kitchen table, both smiling. Bennett exhaled slowly, relief warming his chest. They were safe, and that was what mattered most. Spring settled gently over Burlington in the weeks that followed. The heavy silence of winter gave way to open windows, soft breezes, and the quiet sounds of life returning to the streets. Nothing dramatic changed overnight, yet everything slowly felt lighter. Ivy and June moved easily between two homes now. Some nights they stayed with their mother in the small green apartment, helping her cook dinner or working on homework at the kitchen table. Other nights they returned to Bennett's house, where the hallway stars still glowed softly under the warm light. The first time they ran through Bennett's front door after a weekend away, Ivy laughed. "It still smells like home," she said. June slipped off her shoes and nodded. "That's because it is." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, the twins sat on the living room floor with paint and brushes. Ivy carefully painted a bright golden star on a piece of cardboard, while June added small circles around it. "What's that one for?" Bennett asked. "This one is for all of us," Ivy explained. June nodded. "It means safe always." They taped the star beside the others in the hallway. Bennett stood there later that evening looking at the small paper symbols. He hadn't rescued anyone. He hadn't solved every problem. He had simply listened. He had stayed. And sometimes that was enough to build a family. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.